What are you afraid of? In this classic supernatural horror film, House on Haunted Hill, Vincent Price's character foils his wife's plot to murder him. First, by faking his own death, and then by rigging a skeleton with fishing line to frighten her, so that she falls into a vat of acid meant for him. Ah, sweet revenge. While this film is an example of a relatively human-scale sense of horror, we are also drawn to more fantastical forms, as evidenced by the many different styles and subgenres of monsters and terrifying situations. Perhaps a good place to start in understanding the history of monsters is the definition and etymology of the term. This entry from Etym Online has the following descriptions: malformed animal or human, creature afflicted with a birth defect, divine omen, portent, sign, repulsive character, object of dread, awful deed, to remind or bring to one's recollection, to admonish, advise, warn, instruct, and teach. Similarly, KnowYourArchetypes.com breaks down monsters into the following archetypes: the tragic figure, the beast, the mad monster, and the intelligent monster.
Hi, I'm Naomi Katz, friend and fan of the Rhapsodist, and I'm going to be reading an excerpt from I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. And then, Robert Neville thought, to have this hideous dread vindicated, to regain consciousness beneath hot, heavy soil and know that death had not brought rest. To find themselves clawing up through the earth, their bodies driven now by a strange, hideous need. Such traumatic shocks could undo what mind was left, and such shocks could explain much. The cross, first of all. Once they were forced to accept vindication of the dread of being repelled by an object that had been a focal point of worship, their minds could have snapped. Dread of the cross sprang up. And driven on despite already created dreads, the vampire could have acquired an intense mental loathing. And this self-hatred could have set up a block in their weakened minds, causing them to be blind to their own abhorred image. It could make them lonely, soul-lost slaves of the night, afraid to approach anyone, living a solitary existence, often seeking solace in the soil of their native land, struggling to gain a sense of communion with something, with anything. The water, that he did accept as superstition, a carryover of the traditional legend that witches were incapable of crossing running water, as written down in the story of Tam O'Shanter. Witches, vampires, in all these feared beings, there was a sort of interwoven kinship. Legends and superstitions could overlap, and did. And the living vampires? That was simple too now. In life, there were the deranged, the insane. What better hold than vampirism for these to catch on to? He was certain that all the living who came to his house at night were insane, thinking themselves true vampires, although actually they were only demented sufferers. And that would explain the fact that they'd never taken the obvious step of burning his house. They simply could not think that logically. He remembered the man who one night had climbed to the top of the light post in front of his house, and while Robert Neville had watched through the peephole, had leaped into space, waving his arms frantically. Neville hadn't been able to explain it at the time, but now the answer seemed obvious. The man had thought he was a bat. Neville sat looking at the half-finished drink, a thin smile fastened to his lips. So, he thought, slowly, surely, we find out about them. Find out that they are no invisible race. Far from it, they are a highly perishable race, requiring the strictest of physical conditions for the furtherance of their godforsaken existence. He put the drink down on the table. I don't need it, he thought. My emotions don't need feeding anymore. I don't need liquor for forgetting or for escaping. I don't have to escape from anything. Not now. For the first time since the dog had died, he smiled and felt within himself a quiet, well-modulated satisfaction. There were still many things to learn, but not so many as before. Strangely, life was becoming almost bearable. I donned the robe of hermit without a cry, he thought. On the phonograph, music played, quiet and unhurried. Outside, the vampires waited. So that's just a little excerpt. If you want more, definitely go check out I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. Happy Halloween, everybody.
This poem is by Margaret Atwood from her latest collection of poetry entitled Dearly, and the poem is called Update on Werewolves. In the old days, all werewolves were male. They burst through their blue jean clothing as well as their own split skins, exposed themselves in parks, howled at the moonshine. Those things frat boys do. Went too far with the pigtail yanking, growled down into the soft and wriggling females who cried we, all the way to the bone. Heck, it was only flirting, plus a canid sense of fun. See Jane run. But now it's different, no longer gender specific. Now it's a global threat. Long-legged women sprint through ravines in furry warm-ups, a pack of kinky models in Sado French Vogue get-ups, and airbrushed short-term memories bent on no penalties rampage. Look at their red-rimmed paws. Look at their gnashing eyeballs. Look at the backlit gauze of their full moon subversive halos. Hairy all over this belle dame, and it's not a sweater. Oh, freedom, freedom, and power, they sing as they lope over bridges, bums to the wind, ripping out throats on footpaths, pissing off brokers. Tomorrow, they'll be back in their middle management black and Jimmy Choos with hours they can't account for, and first dates blood on the stairs. They'll make a few calls. Goodbye, it isn't you, it's me. I can't say why. At sales meetings, they'll dream of sprouting tails right in the audio visuals. They'll have addictive hangovers and ruined nails.
Hello, Rhapsodist readers. I'm Ben Latter, AV Tech alum and Rhapsodist editor. Today I'm going to be reading to you an excerpt from this excellent first edition paperback copy of The Shining by Stephen King. His anger at Danny evaporated, and as he stepped forward and pushed the shower curtain back, his mouth was dry and he felt only sympathy for his son and terror for himself. The tub was dry and empty. Relief and irritation vented in a sudden "pah" sound that escaped his compressed lips like a very small explosive. The tub had been scrubbed clean at the end of the season, except for the rust stain under the twin faucets. It sparkled. There was a faint but definable smell of cleanser, the kind that can irritate your nose with the smell of its own righteousness for weeks, even months, after it had been used. He bent down and ran his fingertips along the bottom of the tub, dry as a bone. Not even a hint of moisture. The boy had been either hallucinating or outright lying. He felt angry again. That was when the bath mat on the floor caught his attention. He frowned down at it. What was a bath mat doing down here? It should be down in the linen cupboard at the end of the wing, with the rest of the sheets and towels and pillow slips. All the linen was supposed to be there. Not even the beds were really made up in these guest rooms. The mattresses had been zipped into clear plastic and then covered with bedspreads. He supposed Danny might have gone down and gotten it. The passkey would open the linen cupboard. But why? He brushed the tips of his fingers back and forth across it. The bath mat was bone dry. He went back to the bathroom door and stood in it. Everything was all right. The boy had been dreaming. There was not a thing out of place. It was a little puzzling about the bath mat, granted, but the logical explanation was that some chambermaid, hurrying like mad on the last day of the season, had just forgotten to pick it up. Other than that, everything was... His nostrils flared a little. Disinfectant. That self-righteous smell, cleaner than thou, and soap? Surely not. But once the smell had been identified, it was too clear to dismiss. Soap. And not one of those postcard-sized bars of ivory they provide you in hotels and motels, either. This scent was light and perfumed, a lady's soap. It's nothing. It's your imagination. Yes, like the hedges, nevertheless did they move. They did not move. He crossed jerkily to the door which gave to the hall, feeling the irregular thump of a headache beginning in his temples. Too much had happened today, too much by far. He wouldn't spank the boy or shake him, he would just talk to him. But by God, he wasn't going to add room 217 to his problems. Not on the basis of a dry bath mat and a faint smell of lady's soap. There was a sudden rattling, metallic sound behind him. It came just as his hand closed around the doorknob, and an observer might have thought the brushed steel of the knob carried an electric charge. He jerked convulsively, eyes widening, other facial features drawing in, grimacing. Then he had control of himself, a little anyway, and he let go of the doorknob and turned carefully around. His joints cracked. He began to walk back to the bathroom door, step by the leaden step. The shower curtain, which he had pushed back to look into the tub, was now drawn. For more, read The Shining by Stephen King.
Hello, I'm Eric Mollering, and I am the faculty mentor and fellow editor at The Rhapsodist, and I'll be reading an excerpt from Thomas Harris's The Silence of the Lambs. No, I think you can provide some insight and advance this study, said Officer Starling. And what possible reason could I have to do that? Asked Hannibal Lecter. Curiosity. About what? About why you're here. About what happened to you. Nothing happened to me, Officer Starling. I happened. You can't reduce me to a set of influences. You've given up good and evil for behaviorism, Officer Starling. You've got everybody in moral dignity pants. Nothing is ever anybody's fault. Look at me, Officer Starling. Can you stand to say I'm evil? Am I evil, Officer Starling? I think you've been destructive, and for me, it's the same thing. Evil's just destructive. Well, then, storms are evil if it's that simple. And we have fire, and then there's hail. Underwriters lump it all under acts of God. I collect church collapses recreationally. Did you see the recent one in Sicily? Marvelous. The facade fell on 65 grandmothers at a special mass. Was that evil? If so, who did it? If he's up there, he just loves it, Officer Starling. Typhoid and swans, it all comes from the same place. I can't explain you, Doctor, but I know who can. He stopped her with his upraised hand. The hand was shapely, she noted, and the middle finger perfectly replicated. It is the rarest form of polydactyly. When he spoke again, his tone was soft and pleasant. You'd like to quantify me, Officer Starling. You're so ambitious, aren't you? Do you know what you look like to me, with your good bag and your cheap shoes? You look like a rube. You're a well-scrubbed, hustling rube with a little taste. Your eyes are like cheap birthstones, all surface shine when you stalk some little answer. And you're bright behind them, aren't you? Desperate not to be like your mother. Good nutrition has given you some length of bone, but you're not more than one generation out of the mines, Officer Starling. It was a toss-up between college and the opportunities in the Women's Army Corps, wasn't it? Let me tell you something specific about yourself, Student Starling. Back in your room, you have a string of gold atta beads, and you feel an ugly little thump when you look at how tacky they are. Isn't that so? All those tedious thank yous, permitting all that sincere fumbling, getting all sticky once for every bead. Tedious, boring. Being smart spoils a lot of things, doesn't it? And taste isn't kind. When you think about this conversation, you'll remember the dumb animal hurt in his face when you got rid of him. Starling raised her head to face him. You see a lot, Dr. Lecter. I won't deny anything you've said, but here's the question you're answering from me right now, whether you mean to or not. Are you strong enough to point that high-powered perception at yourself? It's hard to face. I found that out in the last few minutes. How about it? Look at yourself and write down the truth. What more fit or complex subject could you find? Or maybe you're afraid of yourself. For more, check out The Silence of the Lambs by Thomas Harris.
There'll be more, many more. They're coming for me now. And then they'll come for you.